Donald Trump says he is open to talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping after imposing an even higher tariff of 125% on China.
China is refusing to negotiate with President Trump on U.S. tariffs. In fact, the nation is taking the trade war to a new height.
2 minutes ago, the news dropped and it sent shockwaves through Washington. In a move no one predicted this fast, China has officially pulled out of its long-standing U.S. pork import agreement, citing what state media calls ongoing instability in American trade leadership. But that's not all. Before the White House could even issue a response, Vietnam swooped in and sealed a $900 million pork supply deal with Beijing, effectively replacing American farms overnight. And now, President Trump is reportedly livid. This isn't just about pigs. This is about pride, power, and the crumbling of a market the US has dominated for decades. It's about the signal this sends to every other American exporter. And more than anything, it's about what happens when one of the world's largest consumers of meat turns its back on the United States and hands the keys to a rising Southeast Asian player instead. But the most surprising part, this deal wasn't spontaneous. It was planned, quietly, for months. And if you think this is just about pork, think again. Because the real battle just began, and it's unfolding far beyond the farm. Let's rewind. Just 6 weeks ago, the US-China pork pipeline was booming. Despite tariff tensions and regulatory spats, China remained America's largest export destination for pork, bringing in over $2.1 billion in 2024 alone. But behind the scenes, things were breaking. China's agricultural ministry had grown increasingly frustrated with inconsistent shipments, pricing disputes, and what insiders called American unpredictability. Those concerns exploded after the announcement of Trump's Ag Independence Directive, which proposed severe export restrictions aimed at reserving American food for American families. It was a populist move with massive political support, but economically, it backfired. Within 48 hours of the announcement, Chinese trade representatives began shifting orders. At first, they were small. A few containers redirected here, a few frozen shipments rerouted there. But now the whole market just flipped. According to leaked documents from the Ministry of Commerce in Beijing, the new pork agreement with Vietnam includes long-term price stability clauses, biotech sharing provisions, and priority port access in Shanghai and Guangzhou, perks the US never secured. This isn't just a trade deal. It's a strategic divorce from the US pork industry, and the fallout has already begun. The National Pork Producers Council, just this morning, released a statement calling the news catastrophic and warning of up to 32,000 job losses across rural America. One Iowa pork producer broke down live on local news saying, "I spent 30 years building this business," and it vanished in 2 phone calls. Meanwhile, President Trump took to Truth Social to vent. He wrote, quote, "China is making a huge mistake walking away from American pork. Nobody does it better. This is political, and we will respond strongly." But here's the uncomfortable truth. This wasn't political, it was practical. Vietnam's pork exports have been growing rapidly. Just last year, they quadrupled investments in agricultural biotech, opening 2 new state-of-the-art processing centers in Hanoi and Da Nang. Their meat inspection systems, long a sticking point with Beijing, were quietly overhauled with German assistance in late 2024. And now, they're ready. And Beijing just gave them their biggest opportunity yet. So what does this mean for US agriculture? Let's start with prices. Pork futures dropped 8% in early morning trading. Analysts expect a steep decline in market confidence as American producers scramble to find new buyers. South Korea and Japan, 2 secondary markets, may not be able to absorb the overflow. And domestically, get ready for pork prices to plummet for farmers, even as they remain high for consumers, thanks to inflation and retail bottlenecks. It's a lose-lose. except for Vietnam. And that brings us to something even bigger. Something that's already begun to alarm policy experts from Washington to Brussels. Because this is not just a meat story. This is part of a growing pattern. A slow but undeniable shift in Asian trade leadership. China, once entirely dependent on American grain, soybeans, beef and pork, is quietly diversifying. And not just for fun. It's strategic. And Vietnam is leading that pivot. Last quarter, Vietnam signed 4 major trade memorandums with China, covering everything from high-tech textiles to electric motorcycles. This pork deal is just the latest in a string of trust-building moves. And here's the kicker. US intelligence officials believe a rice agreement is already in the works. So what you're seeing right now, this $900 million pork shift, it's a domino, not a one-off. Back home, the political storm is already building. In Iowa, Nebraska and North Carolina, the heartland of US pork production, farmers are calling on the Trump administration to back off its export restrictions. They want open markets, not food nationalism. But in an election year, populism wins headlines. And that's the box the administration now finds itself trapped in. Do they double down and risk further economic fallout? Or walk back the Ag Independence Directive and risk political embarrassment? Right now, we have no clear answer. What we do have is this: chaos in the supply chain, panic among producers, and a resurgent Vietnam, seizing the moment with surgical precision. To make matters worse, China's Global Times ran a headline just hours ago reading, "Goodbye American bacon. Vietnam delivers smarter." That's not just trolling, that's a narrative shift. One that's about to have real consequences for US influence in Asia. And speaking of influence, this move sends a strong signal to other American industries that no market is safe from collapse. If pork can fall this fast, what about soybeans? What about beef? What about corn? Already, Brazil is in talks with China over corn deliveries. And Argentina is negotiating expanded soybean capacity. You may remember a time when the United States fed the world. That narrative is fading. Fast. And it gets worse. Leaked USDA memos reveal that the department is bracing for a 16% drop in export volume by Q4. That number could surge even higher if China follows through with its rumored cancellation of beef contracts, a story we'll be covering in an upcoming report. Meanwhile, Vietnam's Ministry of Agriculture just announced a 5-year expansion plan, aiming to increase pork output by 60%. They've already begun importing cold chain infrastructure from South Korea and Sweden, and have struck port access deals in Singapore and Malaysia. They're not just playing catch-up, they're leapfrogging. And the US? Watching it all unfold from the sidelines. This is more than economic strategy. This is trade warfare without bullets. And the front line is the dinner plate. Will Americans notice it right away? Maybe not. Pork will still be in stores. Prices might even dip short term. But long term, the structure is changing. And the power has shifted. This morning, President Trump's team reportedly began drafting a response package, including possible retaliatory tariffs on Vietnamese electronics, a move experts warn could ignite a broader trade confrontation in Southeast Asia. And just moments ago, we received word that White House aides are considering emergency subsidies for US pork producers to offset immediate losses. But critics argue it's a bandage on a severed artery. The damage is already done. And remember, this isn't about one product, it's about who controls access. China didn't just replace a supplier, it chose a new partner. And in doing so, it may have redefined its agricultural future without the United States. So where does this go next? Will other Southeast Asian nations join Vietnam and form a regional agricultural bloc? Will China now move to challenge US grain exports next? And what happens if American farmers, already strained from debt, weather, and inflation, face another round of lost contracts? We are witnessing a realignment in global trade, one that's quiet, precise, and devastatingly effective. This is no longer a trade dispute. This is a transition, away from reliance on the US, away from unpredictable politics, toward new systems, new trust, and new alliances.